Hare Krishna, Jai Srila Prabhupada, Hare Rama. Welcome back, everyone, whoever is coming back. Today we will be finishing chapter 4. In less than a week, I will be in South Korea in a radically different lifestyle. Gonna have so much work to do. But yeah, I think even still, I might be able to do the next one of these streams in a month or so. But yeah, I'm going to need at least a month to get acquainted to living in Asia again. Also, another quick announcement. I'd recommend anyone who has Amazon, which is most people in the world, I guess, to get one of these Sri Yantra Organite pendant. So dope. I love buying these random things like that. Okay, so just as maybe not as the last stream because I just did one verse the whole time. We're doing the opposite this time. I'm going to do a whole bunch of verses, 35 up to 42, it looks like. And I'm going to do these as fast as possible while at the same time being as respectful as possible, which is a great challenge for me. And hopefully this will be as minimal, boring as possible for everyone involved. We are, of course, using the Bhagavad Gita as it is deluxe edition from krishnastore.com. I got this one from the warehouse itself when I was living down the street from the warehouse. It's one of my favorite possessions in my ownership. Love this thing. Or I should say, love this person, perhaps. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Nagyanatimirandasya Chakshur Unmil. Oops, messed that up. One more time. Om Nagyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. It always sounds good, but I need to do a lot more practice. Okay, let's go back to 35. Got my notes here too, which I'll be reading from starting now. In the last verse, we learn how to submit to a master or teacher. Now, Krishna tells us that the truth we learn from that is we are all part of him, part of Krishna. This is a direct and personal way of saying that everything is connected to everything else, that there is no separation. And Prabhupada literally states that the whole teaching of the Gita is targeted toward this end, that a living being, as Krishna's eternal servant, cannot be separated from Krishna, and his sense of being and identity apart from Krishna is called Maya. And this goes back to that first invocation mantra I just used, Om Nagyanatimirandasya, the destroyer of ignorance. All glories to you. For my life, I would say the ultimate destroyer of ignorance is this Bhagavad Gita, which I would not have access to if it was not for Srila Prabhupada. So that's awesome. Oh, Jai Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So many Jais. Let's read the verse. And when you have thus learned the truth, you will know that all living beings are but part of me, and that they are in me and are mine. End verse. So going on a little more with my notes there. Why is it so essential to find a teacher or master and submit to them, not only formally or overtly, but more importantly, in your heart? Why is it really essential to do that? Because it's natural. It may be feel unnatural, and it may feel dangerous to your false ego to submit, to surrender your freedom, your dignity, whatever, to another person. What? We're all equal. How am I going to say this guy's master? Well, Krishna is telling us in this next verse why we do that, because we don't have a choice. Actually, we are on some level always submitting to Krishna as master. Even the demons, like Hiranyakashipu, all the famous demons, they are submitting to Krishna as master and Lord as anyone else, but they're just doing it in a different bhav. They're submitting to him as his enemy, but they're still directly admitting that Krishna is God, and therefore I'm going to hurt him and try and destroy him and all this stuff. And that is why that, um, you know, in some cases it's better to be a demon than to be just on the fence about something, because at least the demons have personal, the top level demons do have personal association with the Lord, and they benefit from that. Not always, but once in the Shastra, these examples we see in the Shastra, they are always, when they're killed by Krishna, which is always what happens, and when they fail at killing Krishna, which is always what happens, they are basically rewarded for having for putting so much of their consciousness into the Lord. Now they're just doing it the wrong way. They're doing it in the wrong bhav, in the wrong ethos, with hatred instead of love. But they've made up that. But I respect demons because they've made up their mind. They've made a vow and they committed to it. And the problem we see in Kali Yuga today, especially countries like America, is that most of you people have not made up your mind what team you're on. You really don't know. You think you're polite and kind, so therefore you're good. That's not how it works. You have to come out publicly, state, I worship God, or I worship the truth, or I worship justice, or whatever it is, and also say I am opposed to those who would thwart that. If you're a good guy, you have to do that. I've already done that. And if you're a bad guy, well, it's in your nature to lie and obfuscate, so you may not come out and say it, but that's actually what the demons do, using symbolism and different ways. They are now, once again, at least in America and countries like this, they are openly stating, yes, we want to kill you. We want to, inject you with toxic chemicals. They're quite out in the open now these days. And I respect those demons more than you people out there who are just sitting on the fence and not really doing anything about it. Because at least they're, showing some balls, showing some cowardice, which for me as an adult man is a big part of my life. We're going to skip this purport, even though it's quite long, because it's a rather simple verse, actually. And that's the end of my notes on it. 436, let's read that. Even if you are considered to be the most sinful of all sinners, when you are situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you will be able to cross over the ocean of miseries. End verse. This verse may be the poster child of this chapter, which is titled Transcendental Knowledge. Very small purport here. Let's move on to 37. As the blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, O Arjuna, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all reactions to material activities. This verse is an addition to the previous one by adding an example, a practical analogy with fire. And it's interesting also to note the juxtaposition here. So that last example focused on the boat of knowledge and the ocean of miseries. That's the water element. And now we've moved on to the fire element. So once again, this is like just classical teaching methodology that Krishna is using here. It's not this, it's not the opposite, it's something in the middle. So by deliberately showing two opposite elements, water and fire, Krishna is hinting to us that, the golden mean, uh, there's something else happening. There's some truth in the middle that he's pointing to us to look at. Once again, this is classical education, simple, wisdom based. This is not fancy science. You don't need a PhD to teach the way Krishna teaches or to study and learn the way Arjuna is and the way I am. This is simple. It's by definition so simple that a child can understand this and benefit from it. That is on purpose, and that is why this is a colossally successful and amazing text that it is, being 5,000 years old and very famous and successful, like I said. So in verse 36, Krishna says you can escape misery. And then in 37, he says you can escape reactions, meaning potential misery. And then in 38, he says eventually you can be fully self-contained and perhaps don't even need to do any action. So let's jump to 38. Verse 38, in this world there is nothing so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. Such knowledge is the mature fruit of all mysticism. And one who has achieved this enjoys the self within himself in due course of time. That is very lovely. Enjoys the self within himself in due course of time. That is a direct hint and play on words with Atma versus Ahankara, or the ego versus the real self. In English, it sounds like kind of a riddle, right? But if you're really paying attention here, to those Sanskrit words, like for instance, Atma and Ahankara and stuff like that, you should know by now exactly what that means, self within self. And it could also be referring to Paramatma within Atma, holographic nature of reality is what we have here. Although in this verse, it actually does not have, no, so there is Atmani in there. Atmani. So it's yeah, interesting. Oh, that's a beautiful word. Samsiddha, matured. So siddha, like practice, like siddhanta, and sam, like samsara, samsiddha. So when your siddha is all become one, is matured. It's a beautiful word. Kind of like Siddhanta, in the same way that Vedanta is like the conclusion of Veda, Samsiddha is like the conclusion of Siddha in a different way than Siddhanta, but at the same time quite similar. Sanskrit, once again, is just like Chinese. It's actually it gets kind of simpler and simpler in a weird way, or how to not like it's the morphology of it is logical, is all I'm really saying. It's not, there's nothing by accident. It's entirely logical how all these words combine and recombine, and the meter and verse and rhythm and all that. There's endless amount of art in the Sanskrit language itself, but also in these verses and how the verses are choreographed, let's say. So verse 38 is kind of like the conclusion of the past 3 or 4 verses. So, we talked about finding a master, and then Krishna talked about knowledge. You get knowledge, and why do you get knowledge? To cross the boat over the ocean, and also with the fire to burn up everything. And then where is this going to? It's going to here, where after going through that adventure and finally attaining the mature fruit of this transcendental knowledge, um, basically means you're graduated. You don't, in the same way that you graduate from high school and you never have to go back to high school ever again, unless, say, you're bringing your children there, or if you're teaching in the high school. You don't need to go back to high school ever again. And it's the same idea here when you actually get this mature fruit of transcendental knowledge. There's no more sinful reactions. There's no more sinful activity even either. Where if there is sinful activity, there's just barely any misery or reactions, and you're just living within the self, not the body, and also not the self in illusion. So there are many advanced transcendentalists who are living in the self. They've kind of they know they are not the body. They've transcended that, but they're living in the false self. They're living in the self surrounded by Maya that still believes there is no Paramatma. There is just this self, but there is no servitude to the greater self. There is no, so there's many layers of ignorance and illusion. But eventually, at the very end, that's the point of verse 38 here, you enjoy the self within himself, and you're complete. So that could be actually hinting to Paramatma within Atma. And that's what Prabhupada says too in the end of the purport. He need not search for peace elsewhere, for he enjoys peace within himself. In other words, this knowledge and peace are culminated in Krishna consciousness. That is the last word in the Bhagavad Gita. So Krishna consciousness means consciousness of Krishna, which means we are conscious beings, and we are conscious of Krishna, who is what? Paramatma. What is Paramatma? The self within the self. Para means super. Now, normally in English, when we hear that word super, like Superman, we think of above. We think of something bigger and better than something else. And that is true in the material world. But in the subtle realm, that which is super means that which is more subtle and also more internal. So the super self literally means the self within the self that is smaller than the self, and so on. However invisible the Atma is, Paramatma is even more invisible, which of course you can verify from your experience, right? Have you ever seen a soul? It's hard to see. It's easy to see a human, a dog, a cat, an insect, a tree. It's easy to see that. But it's a lot harder to see the soul within these creatures. And it's even harder to see in Sattva Guna the same soul in all of these different bodies. To see the equality there, that's even more difficult. And then once you see that, to go one step further and see the super soul within those equal souls, that is the most difficult. And because it's the most invisible, the most difficult to see, the reward for the transcendentalist, the yogi who can see and realize this, not just memorize some verses and be a, devotee, but actually see this, they are rewarded more than anyone else. Big time. All right, let's read number 40. Oh, wait. Yeah, there's a lot of verses right next to each other here. So we're actually on 39. A faithful man who is absorbed in transcendental knowledge and who subdues his senses quickly attains the supreme spiritual peace. And I wrote in my notes here, this is a shorthand summary of the previous verses, though it adds the part that we should subdue our senses as well as pursue the knowledge process. And that's, of course, a main tenet of the first hexad of the Gita, these first few chapters. Gain some knowledge, but also control your senses. Don't eat too much, don't eat too little, and so on. On to verse 40. But ignorant and faithless persons who doubt the revealed scriptures do not attain God consciousness. For the doubting soul, there is happiness neither in this world nor in the next. One thing I'm seeing now, which is I personally think quite lovely and excellent, in the verse, Prabhupada says God consciousness instead of Krishna consciousness, which you may think, oh, he's being impersonal. I think it's just the opposite. I think this is mercy. I think this is a very personal compassion that Prabhupada is giving to his English readers who, especially if they're academically trained like me, will, in some cases might read just the verse and skip the purport sometime and then come back to the purport later, and are looking for something which is a spiritual science, which is true not just for some Hindu god, which I know Krishna is not, but for, if you're ignorant in the beginning and you see too much Hindu stuff, you might think, oh, this is some sectarian text. So Prabhupada is all, because that's not what this is. So there's lots of little hints here and there that this is the real deal. Jai. So my notes here on verse 40. Now the teacher, Krishna, gives an example of what happens when we do not follow this. The opposite of knowledge is ignorance, and ignorance also means doubting revealed scriptures. That's actually literally what ignorance means. This is an important part here. A lot of people have trouble with. Nescience means you don't know something, and you basically don't know that you don't know it. It's just you don't got nothing there. Ignorance comes from the word ignore. It means there's some part of yourself that knows there's something here, but you're ignoring it. That's exactly what we're dealing with in the world today, because the world today has tons of revealed scriptures, more than any other time in history, in recorded history. You can have the Bhagavad Gita, the Gospel, the Quran, the Buddhist sutras, like there's everything. It's all available, typically for free online, and everyone has one of these. You can literally, anyone in the world, as early as 5 years old even, they have one of these. You can go find a revealed scripture and read it and benefit immediately. But that will not happen if you doubt it, which is ignorance. It's actually worse than nescience, I would say. Oh, that was so here in this verse 40, faithless is synonymous with ignorant. Yeah, and that's exactly how Prabhupada writes it here. Ignorant and faithless persons who doubt. The word "and" there means, even though ignorant and faithless are very different words in a lot of different contexts, but in this context, being ignorant is the same as being faithless, which is of course true because of just the next phrase, two phrases in the verse. Doubting the revealed scriptures means you don't attain God consciousness. So if you doubt, that means you're ignorant. Then you get no faith. You don't get God, which means you're faithless. So being ignorant and being faithless is the same thing. And it's also important to note that Prabhupada says for the doubting soul, not just the doubtful people, but doubtful souls who are eternal, there is happiness neither in this world nor the next. This is what Krishna says, and Prabhupada's translating. Krishna uses the word paraha, which is now next life. And Atmana is of the person. It's beautiful. So in the word for word translation, Prabhupada says Atmanaha means of the person, but in the actual verse, he says the soul, for the doubting soul, there is happiness in this life nor the next. This is genius stuff, guys. Once again, Prabhupada has given us everything we need for every kind of person. All that is required of you, all that is required of you and me, anyone listening to this, and anyone who might tell someone else about it, all that is required is a little bit of intelligence. I mean, just graduate high school, just that level of 12th grade intelligence and sincerity. That is all that's required. If you're simply sincere and you want to learn and you can read English, you're literate, you know how to use a dictionary, you know how to read the word for word translation and then this translate and then the purport, you know how to just, match all these things together, you can see the truth. It's right here. It's like very, very explicit, actually. This is not mystical. That's why this Bhagavad Gita is the best stuff there is. There's no woo-hoo here. There's no hoo-hoo woo-woo. Raise your vibration, bro. That's not what's happening here. This is very scientific and explicit and logical. Now, I'm not saying it's left brain dominant because it's also worth relishing as well. There's so much juiciness and nectar here as well. But for guys like me, that nectar just comes by accident because the logic is so supreme and the philosophy is so sublime that, I don't have to worry about, I don't have a conscious practice of like offering flowers to my Bhagavad Gita. Nothing against that. But honestly, guys, I just don't need to. And I'm trying to get other people to that point where it's great if you do, but when your philosophy and rationality is at the point and your sincerity is at the point where you can just take it in. And then all that nectar is already inside you. You're already Satchidananda. So you just need to realize it. What is the difference between knowledge and faith? Perhaps faith is just the successful practice of knowledge. Perhaps faith is just the successful practice of knowledge. That is a direct logical implication from what Krishna says here. And I got to say, I can't refute it. Once again, this is logic. So I'm only trying to refute it so I know that it's really true and really excellent. And if what Krishna says is true, that being ignorant is the same as being faithless, then it does mean that having knowledge and having faith is the same thing, which of course it is. As I just said recently, when you have real knowledge, the mature fruit of this transcendental knowledge, Atma, Paramatma, you've realized, and also Atma in Sattvaguna, you have all these realizations. How can you not also have faith? How does that work? It's not possible. It's not possible. That means you didn't actually see it. You saw maybe Yoga Maya of it. You saw the flowery language of the Vedas about Atma and Paramatma. You saw some, you had a mystical experience that gave you Ananda, but it wasn't Chit Ananda. It wasn't Sat Ananda. And it definitely wasn't Sat Chit Ananda. Once again, there are many advanced transcendentalists who are Mayavadi, who are impersonalists, who have great states of bliss. They're, advanced in Ananda, in Brahma Jyoti realization that we are all one. That's true. Krishna says it explicitly here. Everything is connected to everything else. Everything is in me. Krishna explicitly states this universe is all one and it's all in him. He explicitly stated that. So it's very important when we do meet a rare soul who has realized that we are all one, we don't do what many Hare Krishna devotees do, who I've met, who say, "Oh well, actually, it's my body, and Krishna is without Krishna, it's nothing." No, it's like, well done, bro. Great job. You got it to this amazing transcendental platform. That's amazing. But just so you know, you can keep going. All right, well. It's important to note here that Krishna and Prabhupada are talking about those who doubt transcendental knowledge and absolute truth. And that is different from philosophy, which is rational questioning of how the absolute truth works once one has accepted it after one has followed the verse 434. So the doubting soul here, one who has happiness neither in this world nor the next. That means, let me give a okay, so going back to a few verses ago, when Krishna says, everything is in me, where does it go? Back to 35, was it? All living beings are but part of me. They are in me and are mine. That was verse 35. So that is absolute truth. That is Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, speaking the Logos, the absolute truth. Now, our job, as Prabhupada states so many times in the introduction and so many other times, our job as people of faith and knowledge, in this case, is to simply accept as true. If you cannot accept from Krishna in this Bhagavad Gita, and you need a guru to, not indirectly, but to give you the training wheels, whatever. So eventually you can accept it. That's great. You should do that. Seriously, you should do that. Even if you can't, even like me, like I was able to accept it before ISKCON, before any sort of devotee guru thing, anything. I was able to just read the Gita and accept all this stuff. But what did I do years later? I was formally initiated by a spiritual master. That's just what happened. It's totally natural. It's just natural. I know it's not natural if you're a Western white person and you're like, we're all free, we're all equal, man. No one's the master of me. I got guns, bro. I got guns. Yeah, it's not natural for you because you're a schmohawk. But eventually you'll get to the point where, you can do that. Where were we here? Okay, so faith and knowledge means you hear Krishna or your guru, whoever your guru is, tell you something that is true. You accept it as true, and then you ask questions. Sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes the timing is perfect, the voice, the context. The master just tells you something, and you go, "What?" And your mind is instantly blown. Your heart is instantly changed. And that is the power of hearing. Shravanam, right? Shravanam Kirtanam. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you just hear the words and it's like, bam. And you know it and you realize it instantly. That is a thing that happens. When it doesn't happen, do you doubt? No, that's against the rules. What happens is you accept with faith and you test your faith by asking questions. So when Krishna says, all these living beings are in me, they are, but part of me and they are mine, you ask, how does that work? What does that look like? Does that mean like each little soul is like a cell on his body in the same way that these trillions of little bacterias are part of my body? Is that what it is? That sounds right. Excuse me. Maybe that explanation works for you, and you get the real. If not, you keep asking. You ask your guru, you ask your diksha, shiksha guru, whatever. You just ask. That's philosophy. That's rationality. And you can do rationality the same way Krishna does in the Gita. First the water element, then the fire element. Try to exaggerate to one extreme. Really make it extreme so it seems maybe nonsense. And then go to the opposite extreme so it seems nonsense. And then you'll naturally find the middle path, which is where the truth is. What does middle mean? Middle means center. The center of the human being is the heart. It's not the brain, it's the heart. What is the center of the heart? It is the soul. What is the center of the soul? It is the super soul. It's that simple. Just go more and more to the center until you get the nectar and you've done it. Let's move on to 41. Almost done. Therefore, one who has renounced the fruits of his action, whose doubts are destroyed by transcendental knowledge, and who is situated firmly in the self, is not bound by works, O conqueror of riches. End verse. This verse, although it is the second to last in the chapter, is actually the complete and total summary of what we are supposed to do, period. First, we renounce the fruits of action, which was talked about in as early as chapter 2, maybe even chapter 1. Then we destroy doubts with knowledge. Then we are fully self-situated. But there's actually another step in there. You can't just destroy the doubts. You have to get to the mature fruit of knowledge. You have to get to complete knowledge. Then you're self-situated. Interesting to note here that in the final clause of the verse, Krishna does not mention some mystical state of consciousness or heavenly planet. He just says that the ultimate reward is being not bound by works. This obviously suggests that one of the biggest obstacles for us is being bound by work. Keyword, bound, as in Mother Yashoda binds Krishna with rope. It's also where we get the word bondage, slavery, etc., attachment in a bad way. And because work is unavoidable, we must at least do some work to maintain the body. On to verse 42. Therefore, the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed by the weapon of knowledge. Armed with yoga, O Bharat, stand and fight. That is the final verse of this chapter. And once again, we've got another practical example, analogy here. Slash by the weapon of knowledge. This is the final verse of the chapter. And what is this chapter? It's Krishna talking to Arjuna on the battlefield. So he's given an impersonal example of the boats on the water of the ocean, the fire burning. And now all those examples are summarized in the most personal, direct way possible for Krishna to tell to his friend and disciple, you're a warrior. Now I'll make it very clear to you. Take up your weapon and fight. Yoga is the weapon. Arm yourself with it and fight. The main point of this chapter is to tell Arjuna that lamentation, sloth, cowardice, these sorts of things he was suffering from could be solved with knowledge. They are like a form of doubt, and doubt is conquered by the weapon of knowledge. The first sentence of the purport is significant. Let us read that first sentence of the purport. The yoga system instructed in this chapter is called Sanatan Yoga, or eternal activities performed by the living entity. Awesome stuff. I love this stuff. Further in the purport, it's interesting his grace, his divine grace, mentions that those who are not understanding the Gita are faithless. And this is so bad because whatever tiny freedom we do have, we don't even have. There is a fragmental independence we are awarded as jivas, and whatever small independence that is can only be activated with faith and knowledge. So, when we don't actually have that real independence and we are walking around all the time thinking that we are free, we are enslaving ourselves more and more and just living in illusion. And later, Prabhupada mentions that this transcendental knowledge Krishna is talking about in this chapter can be summarized by the word self-realization, which is obviously the main theme I've been talking about in this stream so far. This is certainly the most important purport of these verses today. But if you've been listening, you should have noticed some Shakti and other nice little neat things. So we'll move on. You know, for our modern listeners, 42, 43 minutes is more than enough. Maybe even a bit too much. So, Hare Krishna. We share our respects to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mr. Sri Krishna, Mr. Sri Bhagavan. We share our respects to Arjuna, the ideal disciple and friend of the Lord. And we share our respects to Sri Gurudev, Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, who, without him, we would be an illusion. Even those successful transcendentalists like myself who had Brahmajyoti realization before reading the Bhagavad Gita. Oh Lord, how ignorant I was in my enlightenment, and how this ignorance has been destroyed by the great weapon of knowledge. Jai Shri Krishna. Jai Shri Krishna. Jai Shri Krishna. Jai Shri Bhagavan. Thank you. Good day. See you in Korea.